All right, I love it. So I'm going to do the intro. Here it is. Welcome to the. What if I
Hello,
started
hello.
out? Welcome to the Bruce and Ron show. I love that you said the R&B show. That sounds like R&B, like like the Who.
Yeah, I think that's the brand. I think it's the R&B show. I like it.
Oh, okay, great. All right, welcome to the R&B show. Today we're going to talk about something super controversial, super divisive. I've done jokes about this on stage, and yeah, like it's something that could tear people up. I'm excited to find out how we structure our arguments and this debate, but we're going to go to the core of what is better, the Star Wars prequels or the sequels. What is better? So Bruce, just out of the gate, like, do you have a stance? Like, do you have a position like out of the gate?
Yeah, Ron, even until we started recording this, and even today, this morning, I'm like, man, where do I stand on this? Because this was actually pretty difficult to
Yeah.
to to kind of come down on. But I do think I finally have a position on it. I have some reasons for it. We'll get into that over the course of recording this. But yeah, I think I finally have arrived at a position that I'm comfortable with on this topic.
What I want, I'm dying to hear because like here's my question to you. Here's like my flat out legit question. This is a big question, and this doesn't might not have anything to do with Star Wars, but I'm gonna ask you just as a gauge. What is your absolute favorite movie of all time?
Of all time. Ooh, man, that's a tough one. I think my go-to is always Godfather Part Two.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, I just love the way that movie's structured. I like the way that it balanced the prequel story and the current story, and the way it told the parallel stories of the son and the father. I love the look of it, the feel of it. I think it's just amazing, you know. So I think, you know, it's always in the mix, but I think when people really kind of try to press me for that, that's always the one that I go to as my number one.
And so yeah, it's I mean masterful movie. And so for you then, is it a matter of like you go, this is just a well crafted, like almost like in your opinion like a perfect film. Like you don't see flaws, or if you do see flaws, they make it more real, more characteristic. Like in Star Wars, like the original, the OT, where they were like they wanted it to be gritty and look real, like lived in, right? So is Godfather 2, is that one of those things where if it's on, you'll watch it? Like you're like, oh, fuck yeah, I'm gonna watch it.
Yeah, that's one that if you catch it like midway or whatever, you got to kind of stick around for it and ride it out for sure. It's just, and I think just the story is just so brilliant,
Yeah.
and just so masterfully done. And again, just like a beautiful looking film. I just like the cinematography of it. I think just every aspect of it, the acting, all of it works.
So so then the reason I ask is because then it becomes that becomes our template for if we're saying what's better, right? So better becomes like we have like a rubric where it's like, would I watch this continuously if it's on? Is it structured well? Is it sound in terms of like the story, in terms of the look, in terms of all these things? So we have kind of, so that's a good way like to kind of gauge and be like, okay, this is what we're going to compare it to. Not compare it to The Godfather, but compare it to movies that do these things, right?
Yeah,
Cool. I'm gonna say, and for what's worth, I've talked to you about it. Mine is Rocky 3, and people laugh at me when I say that, but I just think it's definitely something I have on my queue right now on HBO Max. They have all the Rocky movies, and I just think I love the story. I love the idea that he's got something to lose for the first time in his life, and he's afraid, like he doesn't know what to do, and he has to retrain his whole system, like by doing something completely different. He works rhythmically versus like muscularly. Uh, and it's just a solid movie, man.
yeah, and I think what was so keen that he did with each of the Rocky films was it's always paralleling something in his life. So I think at that point he was struggling with success, and like his
Yeah,
ego. And so I thought that whole thing of the eye of the tiger, because it was really a parallel for like having lost touch with his roots,
yeah.
fame, and it gotten the better of him. And, he kind of freely admits that now. So I thought that was brilliant to kind of pull that into that film and make it work for that character too.
It has so much heart as a result of that, and two, I think, and stylistically, it veers. I think he was experimenting with so many cool editing styles, and like, and I think he took the energy of the montages from the first movies, the first two, and kind of put it throughout the film. So yeah, there's still these intimate moments with Mickey and with Adrian, but I think like like when he's doing Mr. T stuff, like it's cut really fast, or there's just a lot of training montages in that movie. There's like three, um,
Yeah.
and the fight is cut. Like the fight is short, but it's like the second fight is super short, but it's just like packs a punch. And I mean, no, no surprise, I mean, he booked a movie just from that. Like he booked a gig just from that movie, which was, of course, directing the acclaimed, the super successful Staying Alive, the Saturday Night Fever sequel that he booked from because they were like, oh, they saw like a cut of Rocky 3, and they're like, we want someone to cut it like this, like we want a director that will edit. The
Yeah,
movie
they
like
wanted
this.
some of that energy in it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and they're like, why don't we get Stallone? Like,
That's a guilty pleasure. I do love his cameo too. He couldn't resist doing the Hitchcock thing of throwing himself in there,
he bumps into Travolta in the first scene.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he's wearing like a big, like almost like a moose. Like it's not even a jacket. It's like a wild boar.
Yeah, yeah. It's like way to go with a nondescript cameo side.
Yeah, yeah. Well, okay, so here we go. Tell me your position.
All right, so you want to know right off the gate, right? What?
I say let's just dive right in. Why pussyfoot?
Okay. All right, so I think we'll go into the films, at length and stuff. But I will say that if I had,
Do we have to?
What's that?
Do we those prequels? I don't know. I tried watching Attack of the Clones. Like what was it? 2 nights ago. I was texting you. Oy.
Yeah, it's brutal. It's brutal. We'll get into that in a second. But I do have to say that I have to say that I come down more on the side of the prequels, and I'll say why. I think there were elements of the sequels that I think were more enjoyable, and I think maybe a little bit more coherent story-wise, pieces of them, and I think it promised great things that it didn't deliver. But I think with the prequels, I'd have to choose that because it kept the integrity of the mythology. So at the end of that, you didn't feel like a Mack truck had been driven over that, and it hadn't screwed over the legacy characters, right? So for that reason alone, I'd have to say that my vote is going to go with the prequels, as far as being the better is a loose term, but you know what I mean, of the
lesser of evils, right?
The lesser of evils, yeah.
It's like the debate right now, but to get we're recording this amidst hopefully the end of a pandemic and the debate of vaccine or not, right? And I totally understand that debate in life in general, and then it's exacerbated right now. But some people might argue it's the lesser of evils. It's like, well, we don't know what we're injecting, but like they're telling us it's safe. So if this thing ends it, that's fine. If I can go out and go to a restaurant after this, great. I would say, for what it's worth, I would say my money is not my money. What I find more enjoyable to watch, though, like that I can consistently watch, is I'm very specific. If Force Awakens or you're gonna kill me for saying it, or even Last Jedi.
Yeah.
If those are on, and again I only have streaming services. I don't own cable, but like if for whatever reason I'm listening to something, it makes me think about it. I'll go watch those. I started watching Last Jedi after watching Attack of the Clones. I couldn't make it through once it got to the diner scene in Attack of the Clones, and the dialogue was just hurting my brain so much. It was like I have a 5-year-old who's brilliant, but it's like it's hard to transition into 5-year-old speak. Where it's she puts things together and like they don't always make sense chronologically, or like sometimes she misses like colder or warmer or up down, I don't know, like what, and she's very fantastical, it's very imaginative, but she put things together and then somehow we end up talking about saber-toothed tigers. Like that to me is Attack of the Clones. Like there's so many ideas, and there's one scene I want to break down, but whereas it's much more palpable, even though it's not an enjoyable, like, there isn't this amazing payoff that it pays tribute to the OT in Last Jedi, that it's still easier to watch. It still looks cooler. Like, visually, it looks cooler.
Mm-hmm.
Like, again, I mean, there's so much fucked up about that movie. But I would rather watch, now, Rise of Skywalker, I probably still have to watch Rise of Skywalker, and I'm not happy with that movie. I would still watch Rise of Skywalker over Attack of the Clones and over Phantom Menace. I think Revenge of the Sith I would rather watch than Rise of Skywalker. Revenge of the Sith it has all the bad stuff, but it has a lot of fulfilling moments.
Yeah, I know, and you bring up a good point, because it's like, what would you rewatch? And it's funny because even I feel like with the sequels, there's some that I would rewatch over the prequels, because like with the prequels, it's been hard to go back and revisit any of that stuff.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of I guess I'm looking in terms of what did less damage to the property too. And I mean, you know me, we'll get to Last Jedi, you know, which
Yeah,
I loathe. You know, I think that's kind of like the absolute kind of bottom
right.
pit of this whole thing. But
And
yeah, it's still
we should say too, for our thousands of listeners, we're not. If correct me if I'm wrong, we're not including Solo or Rogue One in this,
right.
or the like Clone Wars and Mandalorian and you know,
Yeah, that's stuff for another day to revisit. We're talking strictly just the films, the prequels and the
yeah,
sequel movies. Yeah.
yeah. Oy. Okay, here we go. Break it down.
So
So
where do we
tell me
start?
why.
Can we start with
Yeah.
the Phantom Menace? Might kind of do it chronologically.
So yeah, actually, that's a really nice structure. Yeah, you start. You start. Let's talk about movie by movie from the prequels, and then we'll,
Okay.
get to the. I mean, let's touch upon the OT,
Yeah, for
and
sure.
then go to the sequels.
I mean, you know, when we're talking about our kind of standards and stuff, obviously for this particular topic, the OT is the standard, you know, and I
Right.
think
Well, that's
high
the thing.
water mark, I think we generally agree. And I think it's almost like cliche to say it, but, you know, like Empire Strikes Back is sort of like, you know, the
The
high
worst
water.
movie ever made. I'm just kidding. No, it's my. It's. I mean, it's a genius movie. Like my
Yeah,
daughter.
I mean,
That was the first movie. No, my daughter saw. I showed her New Hope when she was like 3.5 maybe, and she watched it, but we didn't watch it in one sitting because she's a kid. She was running. Empire Strikes Back. She watched all the way through. It was the first movie she's watched. Like she watched at that time from start to finish. She sat through the whole thing.
that's
Empire Strikes
awesome.
Back. Like there you go. You know.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's again, you know, it's been acclaimed as one of the greatest sequels of all time, which I
Yeah.
would not argue with. I mean, I think when you look at Avengers Endgame, what the Russo brothers did, it was very much. I think they'll tell you themselves through the way they structured it, you know, with Infinity War sort of being that kind of tragic piece leading into the finale, and just the way they did the whole thing.
Yeah.
It's all based on Empire Strikes Back, you know, kind of leading into Jedi. So that's the high watermark. Obviously, I have to admit, I was an OT kid, kind of grew up with the original trilogy. So when we start inching towards, you know, getting to the prequels and the announcement of the prequels, of course, I'm one of those people who's over the moon, right? Having grown up with it, it's just like the fulfillment of every dream you had. It would have been like tantamount to, you know, kids who grew up in the 60s and finally getting that Beatles reunion, you know, that you kind of had dreamed about, you know. So you never thought
Right.
you were going to get it. And it really all started with, I mean, you kind of saw the hints of it with, you know, I think around 97 was when George released the special editions. And around that time is when he announced that, yeah, he's going to go ahead and do the prequel movies.
But here's what's interesting though. Like I remember in 1991 or 92. No, I think it was 1991. I had a friend named David at the time, and I don't know where he got. He was a star. I mean, he was in it to win it with Star Wars. I think his mom was into it too. Like this kid was. It was. He was like the nerdiest friend that I had. I didn't have like nerdy friends like that, but like he was like in it. And he. I mean, I remember him telling me literally the entire last scene of Revenge of the Sith. Like, and I don't know how he knew. Like, was like so, but like, what information was there prior to 97? Even I don't know when Lucas
You
started
know, there
working.
was always, yeah, there was always stuff like in interviews that George did about it, and then also like there was a magazine, like a sci-fi magazine that I remember called Starlog.
Okay, yeah,
I think some of our listeners, you know, it's gonna date me a
yeah,
bit, but they'll know what I'm talking about. And I feel like there was stuff in there about like the backstory with Vader and Obi-Wan that was mentioned, you know, from the Lucasfilm offices and stuff. So the seeds of that story were always there. I mean, it was always there even in the dialogue from A New Hope, you know, when
yeah,
Obi-Wan's kind of, you know, starting to mentor Luke. You know, it's that bit of it is already planted there. But I think it got elaborated in some of those, you know, sci-fi magazines that you would follow then. So it was floating around, which is why this was kind of one of the things that the prequels I think had working against it, is that I think everyone in their mind had
right.
already directed a better movie than what we eventually got, or a better story of this.
Well, and this is what has been so tragic in many ways. Is that you like even George Lucas himself couldn't direct another Star Wars movie, right? I think like what is Star Wars at that this question of like well that's not my Luke, right? So if it's not my Luke, it's not my Star Wars. This isn't Star Wars.
Yeah.
Solo, that's not a Star Wars movie. That's like a weird like right. So and I said we weren't going to talk about Solo, but Rogue One is an amazing World War II movie, right? And
Yeah.
that last 5 minutes of that movie is what a Star Wars movie looks like or whatever, right?
Right.
I think Clone Wars. So again, I'm just getting this all out of the table. I do want
Sure.
to say, in my opinion, watching Clone Wars with my kid, Clone Wars to me was Star Wars.
Yeah.
Like that, but every live action incarnate since 1983, it's, we all had these visions of what a Star Wars movie looks like, and no one, like across the board, could reach those ideals, right?
Yeah,
So
it's an impossible thing to fulfill, especially because also the fan base is so much larger now and multi-generational. It
yeah,
means different things to different people that you're not going to have that one film that kind of hits the pocket for everyone, you know.
right.
Um, but yeah, I mean, so we get that announcement in '97, and we should have. I always joke about this, but we should have known with those special editions. That should have been the first tip off to kind of what was going to happen. Things getting a little wonky with some of the tinkering that George was doing and kind of the things that he was then obsessed with. By then he's a billionaire, and really what started it was he had talked about like when ILM, which is the special effects company
Yeah,
that he ran at the time, did the special effects for Jurassic Park, and he saw the dinosaurs come to life. That was kind of in his mind. We're like, okay, gloves are off of my
yeah,
imagination. I can finally make these films the way I always envisioned them. We've talked about in the past how frustrated he was with
New
especially the
Hope.
first with A New Hope, and you know poor guy. You see the behind the scenes stuff with him, and he's just like miserable the whole way through. But finally, he felt like he had the gloves off, so he becomes obsessed with digital technology,
Yeah,
CGI, the onset of CGI. So that's going to be one of those threads, one of those pronounced, profound influences on the prequels moving forward. You know, and so we get to I think '98. We get like the first trailer. I think it was like November of '98. And I'll be honest with you, Ron. If you want to go back and you go on YouTube and you see those two trailers for Phantom Menace, the first two that dropped, it looked amazing.
oh my god,
I thought, man, when those two trailers dropped, I thought this is going to be incredible. It looked like he actually rose to the occasion.
yeah,
He's like, oh shit, he's going to pull this off. The first one was great, the first trailer, and then the second one I thought it was killer. I'm like, oh
yeah,
my
man.
god, the story's there, the characters are there. Some of the stuff you got little hints with Jar Jar. It's like, oh, I don't know about this, but it really looked like it was going to be phenomenal. And
Oh yeah,
I would still defend that second trailer as like probably one of the greatest trailers alone, standalone trailers that I've seen.
yeah.
Some of the comments in those trailers is people typing in like, I'm still waiting for this movie. It's like,
I remember when you see Darth Maul and like the two, right? Like there's that
yeah,
shot of Darth Maul with like the double lightsabers, and you're just like, whoa, this is gonna
yeah,
be unhinged.
yeah. You get that first shot of Darth Maul, you go, oh my god, how could they top Vader? And it's like, okay, they did find a suitable villain. Like this guy looks amazing and all that. So
Yeah.
got the first shots of the pod race. I mean, it looked like it was going to be killer.
Pod race, yeah,
So yeah, and we finally that wait all through '99. The hype's building. It's
yeah.
the merchandising is over the top. And so we get to May '99, I believe, and film drops. So did
Did
you
you?
actually see it? Did you see it theatrically?
I saw it. I saw. Yeah, that's so funny. So I live in Colorado now, and at that time I was in Chicago, and but I was in Colorado. I had just I I went to school in Las Vegas for second semester of my freshman year, which was like the spring of 1999. And so we were driving back from Vegas, and my dad had a house in Boulder, so we were in Boulder, and we snuck in somehow. My whole like my OG family, like my I don't know where my brother-in-law was, but like my mom, my dad, my sister, we just like were like, yo, this is fucking, let's make a thing out of this. And I'm 19 years old, and they're all older, obviously. But I remember we got into the first screening somehow. We got 4 seats. It wasn't packed, and then on our way out, it was like, like
Yeah,
packed. You saw that.
insane.
So we thought opening day, like first showing of opening day. I don't know how we got it, but it was amazing. And I heard this on another podcast, and it really described how I felt. In the hype, you're like I remember when a long time ago, a Galaxy, or when you first saw the Lucasfilm
Yeah,
sign, and then a long time ago, and you're like, yeah, and I don't
and
remember.
don't forget that they still had the 20th century fanfare. So you had that too.
So you had the 20, so you're like, oh my god, this is it, and like I'm reliving the childhood, and then this is how the podcaster described it, where it was like, after it's done, like you weren't okay with, like, it didn't feel right to say no, that what this wasn't good. Like you were like, it was like Emperor's New Clothes. You're like, no, those clothes look great. Like this was, wow, we saw it. But my parents are Israeli, so they were like, no, this is not good. You know, like they were like, what the fuck did we just see? This was, whoa, this was a mess, you know.
Yeah.
And I remember like still being like, no, 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 it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. And I was excited. I was so excited for what's gonna come next. Like, oh my god, I didn't hate it as much in that moment, but I definitely, it was a huge like 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 it was a drop somehow. There was this dopamine drop. So it was a very, yeah. Did you see it theatrically or did you see it?
I did. Obviously, I've waited my whole second half of my lifetime or whatever up to that point to see it.
Yeah.
But here's the thing: I remember it had screened for critics, so even like a few days prior to the movie releasing, there were some bad reviews out there. So it kind of recalibrated my expectations a little bit. So going into it, I'm like, oh, it's going to be as bad as they say and stuff like that. So, and I have to say, and this is going to probably shock, you, and it's going to, listeners or whatever. I still will say that of the prequels, that's the movie that I think I walked away the least disappointed by, in the sense that even though it wasn't great, I think the great moments in it were better than anything we got subsequently. And I will say also, it I still felt like it planted the seed for a potentially great trilogy. Like it got all the kiddie stuff out of the way. I just thought of it as like, okay, this is like the fun, lighthearted first introduction. You get the introduction, get all the characters set in place. You finally set up Obi-Wan as the mentor, all of that. And so, yeah, I guess I wasn't.
That lightsaber fight?
Oh yeah. I mean,
oh my god,
the best in the whole saga.
Yeah.
The pod race. So I thought those two scenes alone, I kind of walked away with it thinking, okay, it was long, it was drawn out. You try to watch it now, and it's just like, it's brutal. But
the pod race, how long? The pod race is like what, like 11 minutes or something? How long is the pod? It's like obscene. Like I don't get it.
Yeah.
I was never into the pod race.
Yeah, I know my brother, my middle second youngest brother, he really dug it because at the time he kind of had an auto shop and he was into cars and all that stuff. So I know he was going to be really geeked up for that. The scene probably went a little too long because I think they did like way too many laps on it and stuff. But I just remember sitting in the theater with the sound and the visuals of it. It just kind of worked, That's kind of where I thought the CGI serviced the story a little bit. The rest of it, you could just tell George was having a wank fest. Just went way overboard with just anything that he could do, he just did it and threw it on there, and it was just ridiculous. It just looked like more like a cartoon. It didn't have that feel, that gritty feel. And at the time, I think I just justified it to myself and like, okay, well, this takes place eons before, so everything's supposed to look newer and shinier, and it's almost like but also like the dialogue was brutal, which we know. It's like he went for some pseudo Shakespearean thing because again, it's a different era, but it's like, oh my god, it just took the life out of the characters and brutal.
Yeah, I people have people like go crazy, like negatively. Like people give Jake Lloyd a really hard time. I don't. It was clearly directed by George Lucas. Like George Lucas directed this like kid to just be like shucks.
Yeah.
Like it was like a Spielberg ripoff. Like it was just. I don't think it was Jake Lloyd's fault, and I know he's had a hard career since, but I wasn't as offended by young Anakin. I was offended that Anakin. I was offended that he was the one that built C-3PO. Like that to me was a bit, like that was a bit much.
A little shoehorned in there.
Yeah, that felt a little bad. Like that felt forced. Yeah. But I'm thinking back, like there's moments that I really enjoyed, like when they. And let's not wait. I should say. Natalie Portman. I've never liked Natalie Portman because of these movies. Like I can't buy her in anything. I know she's done stuff that was like, I know she's considered a really good actress, like Black Swan or Closer or whatever. Like I see her, she's working it, like she's doing the best she can. She's even charming in Thor, but
right.
I cannot get past, like my introduction to her was Star Wars, and she is so stiff in all three movies. She's awful, and it was a paycheck, and it's just so funny because he had like piece of the kingdom, George Lucas. Nobody was telling him what to do. He could cast anyone. And if you ever saw like the behind the scenes footage of the casting for episode 1, there's like this kid that is like, you see his audition and he's really good. And George's like, no, I don't like this other kid, but I'm going to take him anyway. You know?
Yeah. He knew that Jake Lloyd couldn't act, but he felt like probably he just more photogenic and he could piece it together in editing, you know, rather than the kid that could probably, you know, act better.
Yeah, no.
That was funny. And you know, that points out a big problem too, is that, you know, I mean, you know, the guy's a control freak, obviously, but it's like, it should have followed the template of the OT, in that, you know, George, I think he's great at actually coming up with story and visual ideas, right? And I think as an overall kind of architect of this world, you know, he's a genius. You can't argue with it. But he should have realized, like, you know, it's okay to admit that there's some areas you're not great in. Play to your strengths. Let some great directors direct these actors. Let someone come in like Kasdan and rewrite the dialogue to make it a little bit more relatable, you know. That was lacking with these prequels, where, you know, he had full reign, and it shows, you know, it didn't have the pulse of a collaborative vibe, you know, and he had a yes man as a producer, you know, Rick McCallum, and
right.
It was a mess from the get-go, you know, again, like just someone with too much power, you know, he became the emperor.
Right.
You know, I mean, it's funny, and I think he's even joked about that, but I think, you know, that's what happened.
Yeah, he became the thing.
Became the evil emperor.
I know that I forget what I saw, but like he had approached Ron Howard, Spielberg, like all his friends, and they thought about it, like, and I think especially Ron Howard thought about it, but he's like, I can't, and they were right. Like they're like, that would have sunk him, you know, like you don't want to fuck with that, like.
Yeah.
It sounds like, and you see it in the sequels that you have fanboys that took a crack at it, and like, again, the first 4 times I saw Last Jedi, I was like, it's good, it's okay. And then, but now I have such a deep disrespect for Rian Johnson, you know? Maybe because of you too, but like, maybe you're in my head. But regardless, I'm like, I understand where those guys are coming from, but like, yeah, the yes man thing, like, clearly did not serve him, I think, versus Gary Kuntz. Like,
yeah.
I feel like you see, like the prequels, if nothing else, show you how talented Gary Kuntz was as a producer, and as a like someone who reeled in George, and then you see in Return of the Jedi when he's gone, you're like, oh, okay. Again, we could have seen you could see. I used to love as a kid Return of the Jedi, but like you can watching it now with my daughter, like you go like, there's some like I think the barge scenes, I think all the Jabba stuff is great. I think once we get into Ewok Town, like then you see the footing for you know, the precursor for the prequels. But I that all being said, like I think back, and there's moments like when they land in Tatooine where you're like, as a Star Wars fan, you're like, fuck Tatooine, you know, that's what's up, you know, and it feels like Tatooine. And then you get like Grotto, and it's like, ugh, you know, and the whole time Jar Jar's in there, and like there's these moments where you're like, oh, there it is, and then he just like, to your point, like he just oversaturates every frame.
Yeah.
With so much crap that is not real and not necessary. Versus originally in the OT, the frames were saturated with filth and dirt and grime, and like this notion that it's not this pristine future that people don't live in. It's like everything here has been played with and has seen, and here it's all cartoons.
Yeah, all the actors, they were handicapped from the start, right? Because they have the crap dialogue, you know, very underwritten, you know, just really, really terrible, right? So you have the dialogue because, you know, George doesn't care about dialogue. Here's the overall story and the visuals. He's, you know, visual. He's a very visual director. That's really his strength. But then you have also all the green screen work. So they're not, you know, unlike, you know, you have the hot set, you know, they're the actual physical sets that the original trilogy actors got to work with, you know, sitting actually in a Millennium Falcon, and, you know, just all the different, you know, the Death Star, all those different sets that they had to work with, you know, they're not working to like that deadening green screen thing where you have to like imagine everything, and it's just, you know, you could just tell they have that kind of 1,000-yard stare where they just they're not engaged.
And that wasn't as common back then either. I mean, it was like to go that extreme. Where
you could do some of it, but like he did so much green screen work on it. I know, like for, you know, with Ewan, like on Attack of the Clones, like I think that's kind of where he reached his peak of his frustration as far as with the green screen work, because it was over the top as far as how much he was doing it. supposed to having stuff to work with now, or what they do on the Mandalorian, whereas you have a screen, but you have some stuff projected under so you can
Oh
work with,
yeah, yeah. This is not on the same scale at all, but like I was in a musical a couple years ago called Disaster. It's a parody of disaster movies from the 70s, and it had like 70s music and it was a lot of fun. But I had I had such a hard time uh because there were all these like it took place on a boat and on a sinking ship. And so there were all these like moments where in rehearsal we'd have to pretend like, oh, okay, well the this thing is gonna fall off here, so you have to jump here and you have to move here and you have to pretend that over there, like, you know, the ship is upside down now and all this thing. And I had such a hard time, and I remember thinking, I mean, it's like on such a smaller scale, but like I remember thinking, how do they do it on the Avengers and all that, where it's like, because I can't see it. I'm too busy working on my song or working on my words
yeah.
or whatever, or in the emotion, talking to the other actor. Like to then have to be like, ah, you know, I was like, how do they like? It's so funny. I've never been that guy where it's like, how do you memorize all those lines? Until I did this thing, and it's like, how do you guys for 3 or 4 months pretend that? Because there's no, they see storyboarding, but like when you're in it, you're in it. You're focused on the character. You're focused on whatever. Yeah, I can't imagine how Ewan McGregor, who at that time was not like familiar with like big budget, he was coming from like indie films.
Yeah. Yeah. It had to be like culture shock,
Yeah,
So yeah, I mean, I always try to cut them a little slack, the actors, because I mean, you have Liam Neeson in your role as like your Jedi Master. I mean, how is that not great, right? And someone of that stature coming off Schindler's List, and obviously, and I mean, a long history of like great movies,
yeah.
before that.
Dark Man.
Yeah, I mean, I forgot about that one. How does he not shine in that role? I mean, he's fine, he's serviceable, but it's like it's not everything is sort of below where it should be, in terms of the definitely in terms of the characters, right? You never, and that was one thing that you also worked against you with all these prequels. You never fell in love with these characters like you did with the OT
Oh
characters,
yeah.
because they were just not relatable. They didn't have that chemistry, even between them, and amongst them as a team, as a group. It just had a kind
Well,
of coldness to it.
can we like in the interest of time, let's jump to, because you just you hit on a huge point. Let's jump to Attack of the Clones,
Yeah,
because that movie, and I've heard other podcasters talk about it, that movie should have set up this brother, like these brothers, this like
yeah.
dynamic between Anakin and Obi-Wan, and they never have that. It's like they never. It's like in the sequel trilogy that they never had all three characters, all three originals in one scene. Like here, you have this. Like this is the point of the story, and George Lucas is like, nah, let's send him away. Let's send Anakin on a mission. Let's send Obi-Wan on a investigation. Like what?
I remember seeing this one theatrically, so disappointed with this story because there was so much that was wrong with it, in addition to just being like a total mess, and probably like the second worst, I think, overall Star Wars movie,
Yeah.
until we were gifted with the Last Jedi. But more on that later. Um, but you hit upon a key thing, right? Because this whole movie should have been about Anakin and Obi-Wan. The other thing that it failed to do, which also like the sequel trilogy failed to do, they tried to rush it in Rise of Skywalker. This movie really should have been, a key part of it should have been Obi-Wan training
Yeah.
Anakin. George tries to rush it with a few little scenes while they're on doing other things, but it's like it doesn't. It had such a chance to still tell the story that they wanted to, but expand the mythology of what it takes to become a Jedi, like a fully trained Jedi, because you never
Yeah.
get that with Yoda and Luke. So here's the finally chance where you have Jedi in their prime, and you have this young Anakin. It should have been, they skipped that whole thing of Obi-Wan training him. And I thought that was a huge mistake, because that would have been one of the more engaging things of the story, where you can plant the seeds of Anakin, the resistance, the challenges of training him, impart the Jedi philosophy a little bit more, get a little bit more into building that out, which is, I think they underestimate in this, the whole franchise in general underestimates the importance of the Jedi piece at times,
Yeah.
and how much people are into that aspect of it. And it kind of gets rushed and shoehorned. And they definitely did that with Attack of the Clones. Big mistake with that.
So true about what you're saying about Jedi's. I never really cared about the space battles. That wasn't my thing. I think Return of the Jedi, like that space battle at the end, is pretty badass. Like I
Yeah.
think very fondly of it, but it was intercut with these amazing like I still remember the vibrant green and red, and like
Yeah.
I had the book as a kid, you know, and that image of like like the two lightsabers crossing in front of the Emperor, like that just filled my heart. Um, but yeah, I want to see a Jedi training movie. Like the genius of the OT is that it was repressed, right? Like they held back. It's like it's held back. Like it's out of necessity. They find this boy who has force capabilities, and then they train him like very like Rocky Four, where it's like, you know, he's training in Russia without you know, like modern technology. Like, so I love that about the OT. But you're right. It would be really cool to see them in their prime actually training, because that's the promise of the first movie. I will train him, you know,
Yeah.
and throughout the whole first like 30 minutes of the movie of Attack of the Clones, everybody's talking about how amazing he is. Like he himself, Anakin is talking to Obi-Wan like about like they're in that car or whatever, and he's like,
Yeah.
if you practice your saber skills as much as your wit, you'd be better than Yoda. And he's like, I thought I already am. Like, well, we don't get to see that. Like, we don't,
Yeah.
and that also, so everyone's talking about how amazing he is. Or Chancellor Palpatine's talking about, you're going to be the best Jedi ever. Why are you telling me this?
Yeah.
Like, what? It doesn't serve the story. Like, I
And you
know
know
what it
what?
becomes.
And before we carry on with this too, we have to like address maybe some of the listeners like, well, it's in the books. Screw the books. We're talking about the movies.
Yeah.
I hate when people come to you like, oh yeah, you know, they go and they tell that story in the books. Listen, we're talking about the movies here. It should have been captured in the films because that's what was promised in the story, you know. So that's what you want to see. So I don't want to hear this, you know, everyone always tries to justify, oh, it's in the comics, it's in the books, it's in the cartoons. Beat it. Scram.
So it's, you know, how flawed are these prequels where I have to watch 8 seasons of the Clone Wars to figure out what the hell is going on? And in contrast to the Clone Wars, like that's how flawed this thing is. You shouldn't have to have an addendum.
Yeah, well, and you know, it's I think that was the whole point too. Is like all the companies, it's a multimedia thing, so they're almost it's almost by design. But it's like no, you deliver the story that you promised in the movie, you
Right.
know,
Right.
and and to continue on this thread, we have to just get this out of the way off the bat too. How bad are the characterizations of Anakin and Obi-Wan in this movie, right? Because to me, like I think Ewan McGregor, I think by Revenge of the Sith, he grew into the role. He is Obi-Wan at that point. He has the maturity, he has kind of the warmth. He's kind of a bit of an asshole in this movie. He's a bit of the harsh asshole mentor, a bit cold, a bit clinical, a
Yeah.
bit detached, unemotional. And then you have Anakin, which again, you know, it's going to surprise people. I'm going to have some defenses for Hayden and Natalie in this movie, but this the portrayal of Anakin in this, it's all wrong in the sense that
He's evil from day one. From the
yeah,
first shot, he's evil.
he's an unlikable, arrogant little twerp, creep, you know.
Yeah.
And the whole thing is that these movies would have meant so much more. And I know the defense is going to be like, well, he's Darth Vader. He's not meant to be the hero. There should have been elements where he is set up as a likable character that you relate to first, right? If you're going to make the tragedy mean something, you have to win this people over with this character. This character should have been, if we're going to use like wrestling parlance, some of the greatest heels or villains have been the ones that started off as the biggest baby faces that people cared about, right? Because you
Right.
win them over as a heroic character. When you turn, it means something.
Well, you know, so okay, so you're saying that the sequels are a big fuck you to the mythology that was set up in the OT, right? They've
Yeah.
killed. I would say Anakin Skywalker's portrayal, or the portrayal of Anakin Skywalker in Attack of the Clones, is the biggest fuck you of all, because every rule that we learned about in Empire Strikes Back about the Jedi, he completely dissolves. He talks about his feelings all the time. He gets angry all the time. To me, I thought a Jedi doesn't get angry. I thought a Jedi doesn't express their feelings. That to me is the biggest. I mean, and that's from day one. I think that is a flaw in the writing.
Mhm.
The whole thing about Jedi's not wanting and being these like Buddhist like perfection monks, because you have this guy Anakin who's just like, Obi-Wan thinks I'm dumb. Obi-Wan doesn't give me the opportunity to do what I want to do, and I'm frustrated. I'm fed up with it. He's like a fucking angsty teen, after he's also trying to like talk Padme into like being cool. Like he's like, well, yeah, sometimes you have to do what you don't want to do, and then he starts like on this like this like tirade, and he's controlling, and he's all this, and I go by him freaking out all the time. How is he? How did they let this guy pass?
Well, here's the thing. I would almost like have let that pass if again it was balanced with the other stuff because that's the story, right? Is the fact that he's not sort of he doesn't fit in with the Jedi. So the fact that he's emotional and stuff that didn't bother me because that's part of the seeds that they're planting. But you had to couple that with making him having a genuine
Right.
heroic side, having some likability, some relatability. That's the side that wasn't balanced out that would have, I think, made it work because then, the character does have to have flaws. I mean, we're talking about the potential Darth Vader, right? So you plant the seeds for that, you know. And actually, one of the things I will defend is that story-wise on paper, I think the prequels, it's a solid story if
Yeah.
executed properly, if the dialogue had been better, because the whole thing about attachment and all that stuff was planted properly. I think with his, the passing of his mom and all that stuff,
Yeah.
but it just was not balanced out properly with the character that you cared about. He's a twerp from the beginning, so you never grow to like this guy.
He's so annoying from the beginning, and he. I'm thinking too about like the setup, like the I could see where like I could see where you're saying where if you know if he was really likable from the beginning and he felt like a hero similar even though we said we're gonna in the Clone Wars I really like him like
Yeah,
he's still strong but what you see is in my opinion is like you see how the dark side takes over a good person
yeah,
and then it creates a bigger threat again in this movie he doesn't like it and it's so poorly written and I know Carrie Fisher came in as a script doctor on all these films. So I don't know what like she did, but like someone should have helped him out here, because like it's just so trite and it's painful. I stopped watching. I couldn't watch past the scene, like I said with Obi-Wan and their makeup on Obi-Wan and his beard and he looks so ridiculous and he looks younger in Revenge of the Sith than he does in Attack of the Clones.
yeah. You know why? Because they patched in some reshoots, so you could tell when it's his genuine beard and the hair, his natural
Oh,
hair, versus some other scenes where he looks overly made up and stuff because they had to do like some fake beard on him and a wig because he was doing I think Black Hawk Down, so he had shaved.
oh,
He had that real short cut. Had to return and do the reshoots, and that's where you see why it looks so funky at times.
yeah. Yeah, there's weird moments in there for sure, but like it's so uneven. That whole movie is so uneven, and even like going back to the saturation, like there's the scene that I mean, really stuck with me. Like every scene, there's like things like robots cleaning the window, and there's so much going on to the point where, like I said, like when it built to watching the scene where he's in the diner, where Obi-Wan's in the diner, there's every character is like trying to drop so many Easter eggs that you have no reference for. So like I don't know, Dex. What about that? Like they're winking. They're constantly winking at the camera for what? There's like it's just an atrocity. I can't get down. Count Dooku does nothing for me in this movie. I like Samuel Jackson's like no, he's a Jedi. He can't do anything wrong, but he's leading the Separatists. I don't
Yeah, and
what
Christopher Lee. I mean, he's legend, right? I
right
mean, he's
right
awesome, and I think I would have liked this character, and I think a different story. I could have watched like a separate Count Dooku movie, but the
yeah
thing is, I do think it was a big mistake not keeping Maul as like the through villain up
yep
until you get Anakin as the apprentice. I think that would have been a brilliant way to go is to keep that character because everyone loved that character
yeah
in the thing. And I know George was saying, well, the whole point is that Palpatine can't keep an apprentice. He keeps losing them. I think screw that. You just kind of tweak the story a little bit. Have Maul be sort of the guy who ran through, up until like Revenge of the Sith, because it would have made this film much more dynamic too.
oh yeah
I think having kind of an older Sith, it's okay, but it's like, just, every time you keep trying to like shoehorn these villains last minute where you don't get to build them out a little bit, it's kind of weak. So I think like Phantom Menace should have been the introduction of Maul.
right
Attack of the Clones, you maybe build out a little bit more of that character so that it means more. So by the time you get to Sith and maybe kill him off there, that would have been phenomenal. Like have Anakin unseat Maul. I mean, I think that's like a dream scenario for a lot of people.
Oh yeah.
That's sort of what they should have done, even though like the Dooku character is intriguing and, the fact that he was, I think, Qui-Gon's master and stuff. But, and, Christopher Lee, you go back and that voice, it just,
Yeah.
it works so well, but it's not a fleshed out enough character. And I don't think it fit in well with the story overall.
And even him, they smoke him like in 5 seconds later, like in Revenge of the Sith. Like Revenge of the Sith has this like hurry up and wait feel. It's a 7 hour movie, but that first 10 minutes is just like everything's going super fast, and then it feels like you're waiting.
Yeah.
So they like clean off everything that like they didn't need anymore, like Christopher Lee, um, uh, Grievous, like and Grievous does become an interesting character again in other mediums, but you meet him for a second and then he's done. Like,
Yeah.
what the fuck? Yeah, like there's no
It was
setting up of
all,
that tension.
all Attack of the Clones was, and all the first 30 minutes of Sith was just kind of delayed gratification till you get to the story you want. And that's kind of how I feel like the whole prequel trilogy was.
Yeah, good point.
Like Attack of the Clones to me, it was like 2.5 or whatever hours of like where it did not substantially move the story forward at all.
No.
At all. It was just like a long wait, and that's why it also felt so unsatisfying because you walk away with it, and there weren't enough story elements that gave it some impetus moving forward.
Nobody grows. Nobody grows in that movie.
No,
Obi-Wan doesn't grow. Anakin doesn't grow. He just doubles down. Like Anakin is committed to being an asshole at that movie. Like it's so creepy how he seduces Padme. It's so uncomfortable to watch.
yeah, yes, because a couple points I want to get to with that. Here's one thing I'm going to say, and this is again another maybe controversial point. I personally do think that Hayden and Natalie had a weird, odd chemistry that, if in the hands of another director and writer, would have worked. I think they look great together. I mean, they're super photogenic and stuff. They were just hampered by that corny, wretched the love story, that the way it was written. And I know George is probably like throwing it back to like, older style of romantic film that he idealized, but it didn't work with this. But I don't think, a lot of people say, oh, Hayden and Natalie, yeah, they had no chemistry whatsoever. I don't think that was the issue. Nobody could have made that dialogue work. No. Nobody. You could have gotten like the best actors with the greatest chemistry. They would not have been able to, Katharine Hepburn and, Spencer Tracy or whatever. You just never would have been able to make this work.
There's a scene where they go off by themselves and they're both nervous, like when they start their like trip or whatever. And Hayden Christensen's like, don't worry, we have R2 to protect us. And Natalie Portman's like, she's like phone. It's like the two of them were and that's the movie where George starts working with digital editing, right? Where it's like he's editing different performances.
Yeah.
So you never know, like if those were shot, like the responses were shot in different days, So he just goes even more egomaniacal, more controlling on this movie. I have to tell you something tragic as we move into Revenge of the Sith. You were talking about reading the reviews of Phantom Menace.
Yeah.
I made the mistake, and I don't know why they did this. Actually, I mean, it's kind of not my fault. Maybe. I was so excited about Revenge of the Sith because, like you said, like that's the movie we were waiting for.
Yeah.
Attack of the Clones does nothing for us. The only thing that Attack of the Clones I remember got me excited was and for like a second when they showed the Death Star plans.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, that's now we're good. We're gonna be good in the Revenge of the Sith.
We're going somewhere. Yeah.
There was no going anywhere until that moment because you're still like spending so much time on the Armada. You're spending so much time on like the political stuff that no one gave a shit about, nor did it make any sense. Right? Like I still didn't understand what separatists, like what loyalists.
Oh, confusing story, and we'll get into that more. But the story was confusing from the get go too. Unless you're like a hardcore, really seeing where it was going, it was so confusing for the general public.
Right? Like I still didn't understand who the robots were, like who like those little like Roger. Like I didn't understand what those were. Like I didn't who controls those, who's Count Dooku, and then there's this whole Cypher Diaz like story, this backstory of Jedi, like who, like the clones.
And that's never delivered on either, which in some odd way, it's
right. Like I had to look that person up on Wikipedia, and it still doesn't make sense to me how that affects the story. Yeah. So like the whole thing was bizarre. So when I was like, well, okay, well, hopefully Revenge of the Sith will make sense. You know, you wait 3 years, and the video game came out like right before the release of the movie, and so I was like, well, fuck, I'm gonna play the video game, and it was a great video game. Did you ever play it? The episode 3.
I saw clips of it. What did it do? Did it spoil it for you? The whole thing?
Oh, it does. Like there's like movie scenes, you know, and it doesn't go in depth, but like it shows you how Darth Vader becomes Darth Vader, and you have a fight. You fight on like you fight between Obi-Wan and Darth Vader. I mean,
Yeah.
and it's like, so by the time it was so lackluster, by the time I went to the movie, that I really robbed myself of any discovery.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah,
remember,
well, the problem too back then is that the merchandising and all that stuff would come out beforehand. Like, Disney's been smarter about that in that, like, they actually are really good. The one thing I will give them credit for is they are good at keeping spoilers under wraps.
yeah,
You know, I don't know if the non-disclosures are different. Also, the way they merchandise now, they don't, release that stuff ahead of time. Even with like the original trilogy, you got the comic books ahead of time, and so it's like, oh man, I remember like Jedi, was ruined for me in that sense because the comic book had come out, and of course, 13-year-olds, I'm not going to resist looking
right,
at that. You kidding me? First look at Return of the Jedi, but yeah, the movie was spoiled, and I think during the prequel era, it was the same thing. Like all the books were out, the making of, behind the scenes stuff. You knew everything that was going to happen. But before we get into Revenge of the Sith, real quick, I want to say one other controversial element. Ask your opinion. Yoda fighting, good, not so good. Plus, negative, for, against. What's the deal?
yeah. That's a great question. Thank you for asking me that question. I remember at the time thinking it was like cool because I wasn't expecting it. But I also have like I remember how cheesy it was, where it was like what he can't like reach to get his own lightsaber like it, and then it just after the first second where it just felt like swatting a fly, like he's flipping and it's just,
The Tasmanian devil.
yeah. So I remember wanting it to be so awesome. um yeah, it was so, but he was so cartoony, so it didn't feel like real Yoda. I think I left that movie. I remember being really depressed after that movie.
Yeah.
And I was going through some personal stuff anyway, but like I just remember walking. I'll never forget walking to the car. I went to see it in Evanston at the Century Theater in Evanston. I went by myself, and I just remember feeling so shitty afterwards, and being like, twice you've broken my heart. The only cool scene is when you see the Death Star,
Yeah.
and this Yoda thing was just like, I don't know. I think by that point I was just like, ugh. And you're watching, like the colors were so gross, like the orange of that planet that they're on with the bugs, and it's like, what am I would never pay to see this movie if it didn't have Star Wars on as the title. So I was not a fan of that. Versus in contrast, Rogue One, which we're not including in it, but like still like Rogue One, that last 5 minutes, you go, that's what I was waiting for.
Yeah.
Like that's what's up. And then I know with Mandalorian, with the last episode of season 2, people felt the same way. But by that point, I was already like, I checked out.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are going to be listening to this and be like, oh, these guys are just OT guys, and they don't. It's not necessarily that, I mean, but you have to have that as a foundation for what you've set up, to kind of, be true to it. I think both of us would have been more than happy if the story was there, the performances, and it just had.
Yeah.
I don't know. It was shambolic. I felt like Attack of the Clones was just a mess, and it still is. I mean, It's just brutal.
Ugh. All right, Revenge of the Sith. Let's go there. Let's do this.
All right. So thoughts, like lead-in thoughts. What do you got?
This one. I would say it's definitely the best. It's the most enjoyable of the of the sequels, or the prequels rather, or the prequels. I remember watching. So I was 26 when it came out, and I was so excited. And again, like I was like, oh, I know what's gonna happen. But I didn't. I found it somewhat like I was already accustomed. My ear was accustomed to the bad dialogue at that point. Like when Anakin and Padme are like, she's telling him that she's pregnant. He's like, it's only because I'm so in love,
Oh.
Like, love has blinded you, and he's like, ugh. It's so stiff. I mean, by that point, you're just trying to get through it. You're like, all right, this was the day I was most excited for, and I have a stomach flu. I'm just gonna get through it. Like I'm gonna go, like we'll just do it, whatever. Um, I don't know. I don't think I have that much insight into that movie. I think I remember watching it a few years later, like 2011. I remember I like couldn't sleep one night. I had like insomnia, and so I watched it, and I was like if you get past the dialogue, like it's not bad, like
Yeah.
it's much more clearer. Um, it's much more clear. It's much clearer than the previous. It does what it kind of promises to do. It shows you, like, the minute he becomes Darth Vader. I don't know. I have to revisit. I don't think it's that awful the minute he becomes Darth Vader.
Yeah, it's rushed though. That's the thing I kind of felt with this is like
Yeah.
the turn didn't feel fully earned. I'll get into that in a
Oh
second.
yeah.
But you're right in the sense that probably of the three, in terms of how it would hold up now, even though then I still I kind of was very, very dissatisfied leaving the theater, but it probably holds up the best now. I think the look of it was probably the best of the three.
Yeah.
I think the visually they kind of had tweaked a lot of that stuff. It's just a darker palette. Also, if you look at a lot of the scenes, so I think that kind of
Yeah.
worked for it. Um, but again, like the first 30 minutes, like the opening shot is cool. With like the spaceships when they're on that
Yeah.
on that race to save uh, Palpatine and stuff. But Grievous was like a waste of a
Oh.
character. Like that was just
Yeah.
like wasteful. Like the first 30 minutes were like pointless. So it's finally like maybe 30 minutes in, it gets to the story that you want. And it's like, man, it took you 2.5 films to get to this.
Yeah.
Whereas the whole thing should have been engaging if told right, where you weren't feeling like, oh, we have to get to the turn. You know, it should have been like this kind of slow reveal that like you're like, like an episodic thing where you're watching and you're like, man, I'm really intrigued by every step of this. No, you finally get to like the piece that you want. And then it starts building some actual momentum, which the other films didn't have. The pacing actually starts feeling right and all of that.
I'd be
Um,
happy to watch those 2 hours, the last 2 hours. Or the last hour. I'd be happy to watch that expanded into the prequels, like where they start with that. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Like a good set of comedy. Like you do. You like if you. Like, I know what's the name used to do this. Oh my god, I can't remember his name, but comic like they'll do like the best jokes they'll put in the beginning, and then they have to like build up
Mm,
from there.
yeah.
Um, so it's like I wish they had done that, like taken that piece and built from there.
Yeah.
Because I don't need to see him when he's a kid. I don't care.
Yeah, that was probably a mistake too, even though I think George felt it was essential because you got to see the roots and stuff like that. But I think it would have been cooler to spend the time with them as adult characters, a little more adult, right? And spend a little more time with the Obi-Wan Anakin relationship. So that feels a little bit more earned because it's not until this film that it feels like they actually have a real bond,
Yeah,
right? So you don't have that in the previous film, so you don't have that engagement. Here, they're getting it in, but it's such a short time. If you think about it, they're only like close for like half a film.
right.
They weren't really close in the last one. You see them bickering all the time. Which that also would have worked if they had told that right, because okay, it's the trainee resisting the mentor kind of thing. But again, it just was so hack-handed, and it was just too much stuff thrown in there story-wise that it's like,
And I
you
just
know,
I maintain. Why are they tolerating? Like I'm all about like resisting your mentor, but like why are they tolerating it? Like why are they doing it? Like I thought that the Jedi were more strict.
right.
Like, and I thought there was a strict code. He violates everything.
Yeah. Well, probably because the whole thing of the prophecy, like, oh, unlike these other kids, we wouldn't tolerate doing it. We know that this guy is destined to be like the chosen one or whatever. So maybe that's the
That's fair.
justification.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
But again, they're only close for like the first half of this film, and then immediately again they go off in their different things. So it's like this like needs a rewrite. And I also felt the turn. I felt it was rushed. It's like he's immediately
Yeah.
it's like I mean, even though they have seeds of it along the way, the fact that like immediately he gets rid of Sam Jackson, and it's like he's ready to like turn and like start
Right.
slaughtering younglings. I mean, is there like should there be like at least one step in between that?
Right.
Being someone who was like allegedly a compassionate character to slaughtering kids. I
And I don't
mean,
understand why he does it. I don't understand his motivation.
I mean, it's
Like,
supposed to be because of the obviously the fear of losing Padme, and he you know wants to gain that power to save life or whatever. But that was also all done very weakly, very.
haphazardly, yeah.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
I
I thought
don't.
that was rushed. Although the one scene, and I think JJ's alluded to this too, that I thought was a very underrated scene. I think it's actually one of my favorite scenes in all of the saga. Is the scene in the sort of the opera house
Yeah.
where they're sitting down and Palpatine's kind of teasing out that conversation with the backstory of Darth Plagueis. I thought that was actually really really intriguing and well
Yeah.
done. And as he's explaining life, I don't think a lot of people caught on to this, but you have this weird show that they're visualizing, but it's almost like the sperm entering the thing. So it's kind of like the metaphor for like life itself and the birth of life and all that. So I thought that was really, really well done. And the tease of Darth Plagueis, if they ever go back and do like a young Palpatine story, I'd actually be down for that because if done well, I think that could be really, really brilliant.
Or like a Disney Plus series,
Yeah, I wouldn't maybe not a movie. Yeah, Disney Plus series, or a short film or something would be really, really cool.
Because, like, yeah, that scene, I do really like that scene. And because it's the closest that we get to the mythos, right? Like, it's a new mythology where, like, and it has the same weight and gravity of Yoda or Obi-Wan describing the Force for the first time. So this is because in this one we really see the Sith, right? Revenge of the Sith. Like, we don't know much. We'd never heard the word Sith. But let's not talk about midichlorians. But we never heard the word Sith prior to these three movies.
Yeah,
We just knew that this guy's a bad guy. We knew Darth Vader's a bad guy. We didn't know that Palpatine had Force powers. Like,
yeah, we didn't know the power of two. Like it's always got to be the master apprenticing. So they built out some mythology to it. Yeah,
right, but that's the scene where I think like it's the closest to verisimilitude. Like, it's the closest to dropping it as reality. And
yeah.
that scene should have been like, again, that scene should have been Phantom Menace,
Yeah, yeah,
right? Or
yeah.
like,
I mean, I thought that was again, I thought that was one of that's kind of slipped by the radar for a lot of people, but I thought it was really,
yeah,
really great. And again, simple, a very simple scene. It's quiet. You don't have like a million things going on at once. It's just you're
yeah,
getting to like some story pieces. That's like, yeah,
right.
that's why we care about Star Wars because of the story elements, and everything else is like the window dressing that kind of makes it unique to this. Um, so yeah, I thought that was really compelling stuff.
So ready? I'm gonna jump, like in the interest of time, I'm gonna jump and say what you said. I love that what you said, and that's why my argument is, and again, it's a lesser of evils. My argument for the sequels is what you said. If you look at the tropes, if you look at what makes a Star Wars movie, obviously they followed it like to the T. Like, they were like, okay, well, we need to have the characters meet and then separate and then meet again. We need to have, for it to be a Star Wars movie, it has to be more organic. There has to be more costumes versus digital. These things have to be played. We have to care about these people. Everybody has to be likable, right? They like, I think they followed it like a roadmap.
Yeah,
And so my argument would be that if we're comparing to the OT, Fant- Force Awakens and Force Awakens, Force Awakens does that to a T, right? It gives you a
yeah,
Star Wars movie in 2015.
yeah,
I thought it was cool with Last Jedi when I saw it the first four times. I thought it was cool that they flipped it on its head. I don't think the Luke Skywalker thing was necessary. It never really bugged me, but like I could see him being a crotchety old man. Like, he had the weight of the world on his shoulders. Like, of course you don't like want that, but like, I gotta tell you, the year before I got to see my hero get the shit beat out of him by Batman with a fucking toilet, like, with like a sink in Batman versus Superman. Like, I love Superman. I have a Superman tattoo. Like, so I was already kind of like, well, after that movie, like, watching Luke Skywalker be a curmudgeon, like, it's fine. I don't care. Like, as long as nobody hits him with a bathroom sink, like, I'm okay with that.
Well, curmudgeon is one thing. The butt of a joke, of a Kathleen Kennedy, Ryan Johnson joke is a whole different thing. But we'll get into that in a bit because, yeah, that one always
I,
gets me popped up, as you know.
well, let's like this is like we could. I mean, how much do we need to talk about Force Awakens? It was a remake of New Hope. It had new characters in. The only thing that I really feel like is a huge flaw, personally, is that like the Poe Dameron character, like bringing
Yeah,
him back at the end. Which I guess they were gonna kill him off in the beginning, and they brought him back because it tested better. I think that's when they shot themselves in the foot. Like Poe Dameron is so not necessary to the development of these movies, to the story. That's like my only complaint with Force Awakens. Otherwise, I think it's solid. Like it's good to watch. Like it looks beautiful. J.J. Abrams. A critique I've heard of J.J. Abrams is he does a great job with world building and setting stuff up, but he never follows through with anything. Right? Like he
yeah,
always.
that's common, which you would prove in time. But
Yeah.
but I think with this, he did a great job, and it's funny because prior to this coming out, I think I'd seen hit the first Star Trek movie in the theater, and I remember sitting in that theater thinking, God, this is the guy who should have done the prequels many years before we got that with him actually
Right.
being hired for that. So when he was hired to do this, I'm like, they obviously are attuned to who the right guy would be to do this because he did such a good job, kind of reintroducing that world and having the right respect for it and stuff. And I think the same thing with Force Awakens. I was satisfied with that because I thought it promised what could have been probably the best trilogy of all of them. I thought all the characters worked. Believe it or not, by the time they introduced Han Solo into it, I was so into these new characters that that felt like a bit of a letdown for me because I was into
Yeah.
the new characters that they were building. I thought this was quite phenomenal. So,
I think those.
obviously, it was great to see Han Solo again and stuff, but I was so into these new characters that was a testament to like this was actually working. It was well thought out, and obviously the fact that it was more sets, costumes, like you said, it had more of that feel. But I also thought like the story could move it forward. There was the seeds for that, and there was enough intrigue within the story to do so.
You're bringing up such good points, actually. You're right. I don't think, I think the worst part of the sequels is, with the exception with the exception of Anthony Daniels and Billy D. Williams, I think the worst part of the sequels is it's like the distraction of like a older General Leia who like I don't know what happened to her in life. I mean, I know she had so many problems, but like I can't understand everything she's saying in those movies. Like it feels like she has lockjaw.
Yeah.
Harrison Ford is so tired, and like God, like in Revenge of the, I mean in Rise of the Skywalker, he's just like he didn't even shave that day. He looks so shitty in Rise of the Skywalker. Like I hope that's not what his afterlife looks like. I didn't need the. Yeah, I guess I didn't. I never thought about it. It was exciting when you read about it. All three have signed on. I think they're the most distracting part of the sequels.
Yeah, well, and it was good to see Harrison because it seemed like for the first time he actually gave a shit, at least in Force Awakens,
He's
because
such a
I,
dick.
I thought he did a good job bringing the character back, without being for me, it wasn't like an embarrassment. I actually thought he did a good job in that. So I give him a pass on that because I think, aside from what they chose to do with the character, which is debatable and stuff, I know he was pleased with it because he felt it served the story purpose.
Yeah.
But I think at least he got to be Han Solo, whereas when we get to Last Jedi, what they did with Luke Skywalker was a travesty. It was bordering on blasphemy if you're
If you're a fan, yeah.
if Star Wars is like religion to you. So yeah, we'll get into that next. But yeah, I think overall I left that very pleased because I thought the promise of that last scene too,
Yeah.
where she kind of is sending the lightsabers, like, what does this mean? Are they related? How's the training going to go? And again,
Yeah.
the promise of the training that we never got, because it's like, okay, to see this and,
Yeah.
again, I wouldn't have minded the crotchety old Luke, depending on what he had been through. But what they did with the character, like, totally destroyed it. And I thought there were a lot of sort of ulterior motivations for doing so. And we'll get into that.
Get into it. Get into it. Get into. Here we go. Let's open it
Yeah, I
up.
mean, I think from the beginning, Kathleen
Kathleen.
had her agenda, and I think she didn't care. She didn't give a shit about the OT characters, especially the men.
Yeah.
She was obviously setting up Leia to be like sort of the big female character that was going to be the mentor at the end. She didn't give a shit as long as Rey was protected as a character, because no one else would have allowed what happened to Luke in Last Jedi happen. To take those kind of liberties with this character that's heroic.
Yeah.
I know people say, oh, it's subvert things and make things different. But it's like me having the arrogance coming into like the Superman property, and I'm going to direct the next Superman. And I look at it and I go, Superman, so many years since the 30s or whatever, 20s, 30s. this omnipotent character. We don't need to see that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it a depressed, character, strip him of all his power, all his dignity, all that stuff, just for my own jollies, right? Something I know is, the fans are not going to care about one bit.
Zack Snyder.
Yeah. Which I think, he didn't bastardize Superman quite to the level that Luke got bastardized in this, and I think, again, it was for the reasons of weakening him so that the Rey character emerges as like the stronger, the ultimate hero, as opposed to Luke Skywalker, the old white male that she doesn't need to be taught by. She mentors him. I mean, the logic of it is all like convoluted from the get-go, and reintroducing that character, it was tragic because for fans like myself who waited all these years for the return of that character, kind of to see Luke Skywalker actually as a fully trained Jedi, wise kind of mentor. He didn't have to be the star. He didn't have to be like the big action star in it either. But to do what they did with him, I thought was beyond arrogant. It was inconsiderate, and it was just even story wise, it was just kind of wrong.
Yeah, it didn't.
Yeah, that's my take on that.
So we're talking about Last Jedi, like. I certainly agree with, like, I don't disagree with that for sure. I would have loved, see, this is the thing. This is what it confused me about the sequels. So there's an interview with J.J. Abrams, I think, on the DVD for, like, the behind the scenes of the first Star Trek movie. And I think he says, like, we made a Star Wars movie. Like, we made Star Trek into Star Wars. Star Trek typically was slower, and right, but we wanted to make it. So, of course, you go, yeah, well, that's great, right? This is the biggest, this is where the biggest fucked up thing is. That there was no, like Kathleen Kennedy clearly had an agenda, great. But that's fine if your agenda is to make this pro-female Star Wars movie. As a dad to a daughter who loves Ahsoka, great. Make the Ahsoka movie. Right? Or make the young Leia movie or make the Rey movie. But why do I need, like, why are you like, what's it called? Like, teasing me with the characters that I want to see. No. Like it's like driving, going on a long distance driving trip and you have to go to the bathroom and you're driving past like McDonald's after McDonald's, which are the best bathrooms on the road ever, like I wouldn't eat there, but I love going to the bathroom there. And so you're like, no, that's perfect. I want to go to the McDonald's. Like, I love their bathrooms. Especially they redid the cafes. They look futuristic now. Why are you dangling this thing in front of me that I need right now? I have to go to the bathroom. Maybe there's a horrible scenario. But, like, what I'm getting is, like, if you're going to show me...
You are going somewhere with this, right, Brian?
If you're going to show me Leia and Luke and Han, I'd rather watch that movie any fucking day of the week.
Yeah.
I don't need a Rey movie. If you want to just make a Rey movie, make a Rey movie. But you're right. Like, she dangled those three in front of it to make them weaker and smaller. And I honestly, I think Leia, too. I think Leia, like, it's tragic what happened to her, that she died amidst shooting Last Jedi. But, I mean, I didn't like where she was in the first movie anyway, like in Force Awakens. So I just think, like, to your point, I love what you're saying. And I think you're absolutely right. I think in my opinion, make the Rey movie. Like, just make the Rey movie. Start from scratch. Leave Luke Skywalker as this, like, shadowy figure that nobody ever sees or whatever. Or he trains her. Like, positively. Like, he hands over the baton in a clear way. But you're right. I mean, like, it didn't bug me at the time. But I see what you're saying, which is that you go, like, this guy is just, like, what he does for the rest of the movie, and I know Mark Hamill is not a fan of this movie, he just shits on the Force.
Yeah.
Why? Why do I need that? Why do we need, and Rey's the one that says, no, it's good. So yeah. I think the whole thing is a distraction, and I think
and also, like, oh man, I mean, in addition to all of the embarrassing characterization of the character, the fact that he almost kills his nephew is so antithetical to, like, the journey that he had gone on as a character, right? Because he kind of risen above a lot of that stuff, I mean, you could defend and say, yeah, and at heart he's still a Skywalker, so there's that bit of it, but it felt like that character was used more as a plot convenience, right, rather than as a true, like, writing something for that character that felt right and appropriate for that time. I hate it because they really essentially destroyed the integrity of that character by having him be, like, kind of creepily kind of mind listening in on his nephew and, like, ready to slaughter him. It's like in his sleep, no less. It's like, this is Luke Skywalker. get out of here, man.
Right. Like, and I think this is again to the point of like, there was no big captain watching the ship. Like,
No, they had no master plan going into it. They wanted to rush, which was a big mistake. You know, they could have taken another year to really thoroughly plot out this stuff. You know, even if you had different directors, as long as you had like the overall
right.
story written in one piece, you could have had a different directors because the original trilogy
All
certainly
three
had,
different.
you know, and it would have worked. Here's the thing with Rian Johnson, he's the director that you hire to do one of the standalone movies
Right.
because he wants to do his own thing. So fine, get him to do one of the standalone movies where he can reimagine the world, which it needs, you know, and I could see that the argument for that as well. It
Yeah.
needs a bit of that, but you don't do it as part of the trilogy, which has established tropes and all that stuff. That has a coherence and a logic to it. You don't try to upend that bit of it. You know, you go in and you experiment on the side films. You know, there was plenty of opportunity for that. Putting him in this mix was such a big mistake, and I think it's going to be bared out historically that in terms of the eroding the audience
Yeah.
confidence and trust, it was one of the most like profound things to happen to. I mean, basically the success of the Mandalorian, it's because of the Last Jedi, because it's like the anti-Last
Right.
Jedi in terms of honoring the characters and the legacy.
And to that point, I will say, for that reason, I don't. I'm a fan of Taika Waititi. I'm not looking forward to a Taika Waititi Star Wars. To me, it's like yeah, like I get where they're going. They're just throwing shit out there now. As much Star Wars. I mean, there's. I thought that after Last Jedi they would reel things back and just focus, but with the success of the Mandalorian as a kind of a accompaniment to what went wrong with Rise of Skywalker, like they're I think they're going overboard now with like Rogue Squadron and 20,000 shows and all these things. I think it's completely like over the top. But you're right. Like so I'm getting is like Taika Waititi to me, similar to Rian Johnson, is and I don't mean to be a flip flopper here, but I acknowledge both sides of the coin. I think Taika Waititi will do a Taika Waititi movie, and that humor that like for the first time I saw Last Jedi where Poe's like, okay, waiting for Hux. Like I was like, oh, that's cute, and then I remembered, no, that doesn't feel right. It just doesn't. This does. I think a Taika Waititi will not feel right. So I don't
Right.
care how experimental, how on the fringes it explores like Gamorrean. What are they called? Like the Gamorrean Knights or the Gamorrean, like the
Guards.
guards, Gamorrean guards. Like I don't care if it's a whole movie about that one Gamorrean guard that gets strangled by Luke Skywalker in Return
Yeah.
of the Jedi. Like it could be a whole fucking like his whole family upbringing. I don't care. Like it's gonna not feel right, you know? Like a Taika Waititi movie. So,
And you know
like
what? Here's the thing: if they do that, I don't have to care because it's not part of the central
right, I
story.
don't have to
So
watch it. Yeah,
the standalone films, I don't have to care. The fact that they did that with this, I mean, I walked out of that the Last Jedi really depressed. I mean,
yeah,
just I couldn't believe what I had seen. Have not been able to revisit it. I have no interest in ever revisiting it. I thought it was just shameful. It was just a joke, a really bad joke. Um, so yeah, I mean,
yeah,
I still have, don't hold it in any kind of. The humor didn't work. So I mean, it wasn't just the Luke Skywalker thing. I because it sounds like that's kind of like what I'm basing most of my stuff on.
right.
I thought the story was weak. I
Rose,
thought,
Rose. Ugh.
oh my god, the Canto Bite stuff was just silly. It was trying to shoehorn all this kind of like animal rights stuff into it as well, and like
Yeah,
kind of empowerment. Again, ideas that in and of themselves are not bad, but trying to kind of force them into this, it was awkward. And again, the humor to me didn't work. It was way over the top,
yeah,
turning the characters into like comic characters, with Hux, which they actually tried to make it into, he was like a more, you know, I thought like that dynamic between him and Ren was going to be kind of interesting heading forward.
yeah.
And that, he was turned into like a bumbling
He was
character.
awful in Last Jedi. He is so uncomfortable, and he's like he just like his face like grimaces, and he just looks like he's straining. But that all being said, Kylo Ren is a phenomenal villain
Yeah,
until Rise of Skywalker. Yes, he's a phenomenal villain.
yeah, and they could have done a lot more with him too.
Yeah. So, like our thesis is that all these are bad, you know. But Force Awakens had a lot of promise. Rise of Skywalker.
All right, so Rise of Skywalker. So here's where now you get into like, okay, Ryan,
Sorry.
yeah, Ryan Johnson. I shit on you, JJ, and now it's like, I call it the Return of the JJ or JJ's Revenge.
Yeah.
JJ's turn to kind of, which he did, kind of subtly and not so subtly. You saw him kind of, with the throwing the lightsaber and just making, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
A little bit of course correction. At too little, too late, and way too much crammed into it. I felt like JJ was
Oh,
throwing whatever in a desperate attempt to sort of gain audience goodwill
yeah.
back. I mean, I actually, as a standalone film, I enjoyed it. I was entertained by it, and obviously because it was back to honoring the legacy a little bit.
Yeah.
But when I went back and revisited it, and I'm like, man, it just, you know, again, it was trying to do too much too late. And in terms of the story, again, what do you do after The Last Jedi left you with a big pile of crap,
Yeah.
to work with, right? Because it dismantled what JJ was trying to build, which could have been intriguing. You kill off your main villain in that movie too, which that's supposed to be, your kind of your guy moving forward. Um,
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
yeah, because think about it. Now they have to put in shoehorn the Emperor, which again, that would have been a great story piece if introduced in Last Jedi, where you kind of have the big climax of Last Jedi should have been Rey discovering that she's a Palpatine, because then you wonder into the next film, like the struggle with like, which way she's going to go. But that should have been planted all along and had maybe Palpatine return or something. But obviously, it was out of necessity. They didn't know that was going to be the idea.
How do they not know? I know this is so like I saw a video, a YouTube video in like 2015 maybe. Like right after that Force Awakens, I was like researching. I was like, oh, there's so many questions, and right, I was like I cannot wait for the next movie. And I saw a video at some point after that where maybe it was 2016, where they were like, here's why we think she's a Palpatine, and it all made sense.
Yeah,
Like from the way that she fights, like where it's like she was like like just attacking this, like the way that he fights in Revenge of the Sith, and like her accent, like everything made sense, everything. And then they just like shit on it in Last Jedi, and so by the time that it got to 20, I mean by the time that it got to Revenge of, Rise of Skywalker, it's what I wanted, but I was like already like nah, you
yeah.
know, you know
Again,
that that wasn't the case.
if it had been done throughout, you could have told it as a coherent thing where
Exactly.
you build you build and you build Palpatine back. Here, you're shoehorning him in a bunch of other elements, and it's just not enough time to
Mm.
tell that story.
Mm-hmm.
That he's the grandfather. That should be huge. That
Right.
should be a huge bit of the story where that should be the central focus of a lot of the film, and it's like an added thing, and he only has a few scenes in there too,
Yeah.
to really make that happen, and they only kind of confront each other at the end, where that's again there should have been little bits of that throughout the whole story. I mean,
Yeah.
definitely, Last Jedi should have built upon her origin, and instead, it's again a political thing of like, oh, anybody can be a Jedi, so we're not going to make her anyone special. It's like, oh God, this is not. It's fine if it was a different idea
Right.
in a separate story, but this is not what JJ planted the seed for. He was carrying on the tradition of obviously having meaning and stuff. So, you have directors kind of, competing visions, and it just all works against each other. It just has no coherence.
Oh,
So, like, with Rise of
yeah.
Skywalker, he tries to give these fan servicey moments, but they don't feel genuine. They feel very shoehorned and very unearned.
Like again, they obviously they were dealt a shitty hand with losing. I mean, and her family too, like losing Carrie Fisher. But Billy D. Williams again, Billy D. Williams should have been added in Last Jedi. He's
Yeah,
like what he is too powerful of a character. He's too important of a character to just throw in as like I don't even know what he. It's like he's so not fulfilling in that movie, and he's so cheesy. And in the last scene where he's talking to that girl that I think they're implying that that's his daughter, and he's like,
yeah.
"We'll go find out where you're from." Like he looks like he's gonna like touch her. Like it's uncomfortable. Well, who'd you say your mama was? Oh, I'll tell you who your daddy is tonight. Like that's uncomfortable, you know? Or
Yeah,
the to your left moment, like in the final battle where he's like,
yeah.
I'm
And
here.
then JJ like photoshops every ship that's ever been, built in Lucasfilm. It's like,
Yeah. And you're just like, what
you know,
is that? Is that? Oh yeah.
yeah. I mean, it was brutal, man. Again, I felt like it went back to at least respecting the
Right.
characters a little bit, it tried to build on the good camaraderie that the characters had in Force Awakens, which I thought, again, that was promise unfulfilled, because they all
Right.
got kind of shot to hell in the second film. There are a lot of things I like. They tried to fix Luke. I mean, that was a little bit too late, but at least he was more the mentor in this film. He finally lifts the X-wing. But again, the fan servicey moments, it's like, you feel mixed on that.
I
Um,
wonder if you watch it. Like, I know they did a cut of the prequels. There's like on the internet. I've never seen it, but where they cut Jar Jar out, and they do like a, I forget what it's called, but it's like a 30 or 40 minute cut of all three prequels, and they cut out all the extra stuff, and it's just one story. And
yeah,
supposedly that's really good. I feel like I wonder if you watch the sequels without Last Jedi. I wonder, like, and if you've never seen it, I wonder if that's more cohesive almost. Like,
yeah, yeah. I mean, there's probably a lot of stuff you wouldn't miss because it wasn't like it alluded to a Last Jedi a lot, even though they pulled like I guess the sort of telepathic thing from that. But I mean, there wasn't like a lot that was pulled from that because obviously, even though they deny it and they're like, they try to act like they're proud of the Last Jedi, you could tell like the hammer came down at some point, whether it was Bob Iger or
yeah.
something. It's like, yeah, it's like, they didn't allude to it story wise a lot.
And it's looking like Kathleen Kennedy's staying around. Like, we thought she was gonna be done after Rise of Skywalker. Like, it seems like she's around.
He's like Palpatine. You can't get rid of her, man.
No, Can-
Awful.
cancel culture applies in other places, not in this, and not at Lucasfilm. Except for, well, that's not true.
She's
Cancel
got to
culture.
go. She's
Yeah,
got to go, man, because like,
it's just not a good fit.
no, it isn't. And obviously like whatever's worked about it is she's brought in some, like any project that's worked under her leadership, it's because obviously with JJ they brought in somebody who cared about the property and
Yeah.
had respect for it. Um, and now with Mandalorian, the creative behind that, it's people who actually care, and
I
are
don't think she's
respectful.
that. I don't think she's that involved with it. I think George Lucas is involved with that. Dave Filoni, John Favreau. These are hard hitters. Whereas like Ron Howard came in at the last minute for
Yeah.
Solo, so like he wasn't part of that original thing. So I just think like yeah, like with I don't think she's that involved with Mandalorian.
Yeah, and then with Johnson, you had someone who probably just wanted a high profile gig, but had no intention of really making a Star Wars film. He was just kind of using it as a platform to kind of do his own thing. And
Yeah.
I guarantee you're never gonna see that trilogy see the light of day.
Well, I've heard an interview with him where I think he feels bad. Like I know he fought back and was arrogant, but I think he felt bad by the backlash and the sense I got, and he's like I love Star Wars as a kid. I wanted to make a Star Wars movie, but it was so, I think what J.J. Abrams does is J.J. Abrams has that like the glare, like his style is like the glare and like maybe like MacGuffins here and there, and setting up these question marks, but. I think he did a good job in Force Awakens and respectfully like in Rise of Skywalker, where his style of storytelling, he kind of it does take a step back where he just goes, what would George Lucas do? Like how do I use those OT movies to structure this, and I will be in service of that more than my own style, my own vision. Whereas Ryan Johnson's like, yeah, let's like what's like how do I make it mine? Like, how do I kind of take it from here and put it in my sandbox? And I think that's to the detriment. But overall, we can still make the argument. I think you made it especially better than I did, where it's like, these are better movies. Like, these are more watchable
Yeah, they are
than the
more watchable
prequels.
as a whole, and they flow
Yeah.
better. You're not kind of grimacing. They don't have that. They're not as embarrassing overall,
Yeah.
except the Last Jedi for me. They don't. You don't have that cringeworthy. I actually thought Force Awakens was probably the best film for like a mass audience that like is
Yeah.
not hardcore fans, because I think it's just generally an entertaining movie that if you're not a Star Wars fan, you can get into it. So I think that it has that going for it.
So check this out. This is my final question for you then, as we wrap it up. Like, this is my question. So, if you take Last Jedi, so now let's just talk about movies. If you take and the ick factor, you take Last Jedi and it's not a Star Wars movie. It's a movie. It's a space sci-fi movie with this curmudgeon-y old man who almost killed his nephew, who started turning bad, and and there's some corny jokes in there, and I do want full transparency. And in the first scene, the guy who's supposed to be a hero kills off most of the rebellion and doesn't get in trouble for it. Like the guy is so arrogant and selfish that they lose the majority of their ships and support to the point where they are like nothing by the end. If you take that with a grain of salt, isn't that still a better movie than the ick, gross, weird, like embarrassment, the childlike dialogue of the prequels?
Mm, a good question, right? Because
Visually,
no, you know what? You speak to something which I think is also a key point, right? Because I think the people who enjoyed Last Jedi, the reason they enjoyed it is because I think the people who didn't like it were probably like more the hardcore Star Wars fans,
yeah,
like me or the old school fans, right? So I think what happened to like for a general audience or a younger audience, they were probably coming into it with that freshness, where so it probably worked for them as a general sci-fi fantasy
yeah,
film, you know. Whereas with the prequels, if you're a fan, you're maybe a little bit more into it because at least there's things about it that make more sense in terms of the mythology and the story.
right.
But if you're not a Star Wars fan and you watch both of them cold, I would probably say that maybe a general fan would lean more towards Last Jedi rather than the prequels, because I think maybe you have to be a Star Wars fan to like the prequels. Whereas Last Jedi, it may play better for just a
General
general
public.
audience, someone who's coming into it cold.
I will say though, like again, the more I'm thinking about Last Jedi is really our sticking point, and so where I remember feeling though like, oh, you know what, like I remember thinking the reason I liked it the first time I saw it was I was like, okay, like I think it is a better sci-fi movie, like as a movie, like again for like take like to your point of what you said. But then I go, you know what? What's wrong with this? Like, what's wrong with not getting what I want? A lot of people felt the same way about Empire in 1980. They didn't get what they wanted, right? It's I mean it is a better movie, but it looks different in many ways, and it just
Yeah.
it like expands and I go like they're talking about right now as we're recording one of the names that they're throwing around for the new actually J.J. Abrams produced Superman movie is Michael B. Jordan.
Mm.
I don't think Michael B. Jordan is necessarily like the like the greatest actor of our time. Like Chadwick Boseman, I think would have been a phenomenal Superman. But like I think he's a phenomenal actor. But like I could get down as a Superman fan. I could totally see Michael B. Jordan as Superman. Like I could totally see it. I think there's a purity. I could see that. This is gonna be controversial. I think Warmonger was in a very well written character, very well directed. I think Ryan Coogler. Give Ryan Coogler a Superman movie. I mean, a Superman movie, yes, and a Star Wars movie. Give him a Star Wars trilogy. Like I think, man, Ryan Coogler can do no wrong. But I think, I don't think Michael B. Jordan was amazing in that role. People will totally disagree with that.
Mm.
I think he would be a really good Superman. I think because what I didn't like about him in Warmonger, I think he's just a good guy. He looks like a good guy.
Oh, he certainly got
The
the
build.
look, physique. He's got the build for it. Yeah, for
Mhm.
sure. I mean, he's a kind of athlete, you know, he's seeing Creed and all that stuff. So he would kill it in that sense.
Yeah. But the regal, like I think he's very regal. I think he has like this kindness about him. I think I like so I
But you know
go
what he does, what I wonder though, and maybe he had a little bit of this in the Creed movies. There's something about him that's a little invulnerable that I'm like, you need a little bit of the vulnerability for that Superman character. So obviously that's where the acting would come in and how they do the characterization. But he's just a little too
that's my
perfect.
argument.
Yeah.
That's my argument about him as an actor is that it's not he's acting. I don't think he's even in Creed like I in Creed 2 especially where he has like some hard scenes where he's gone to the depths. I think I think he's like a teenager like a it's a high school production. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think he's a really good high school actor. Right where he's like
Talk
pretending.
about a backhanded compliment.
I had a teacher say that to me where he's like, "You're an okay high school actor. You'll never be a good college actor, and forget about professional as an adult." I was like, "Okay."
Ron, they got to give you what you want, though. You know, I know you need a Superman film because again, you see what happens when they don't give it to you like a Star Wars film. And I'll make one final argument about the whole subversion thing if we have a few minutes. But you can be subversive, like they did in Empire, if you deliver the right story, or like Christopher Nolan with The Dark Knight.
Yep.
That's a movie that no one expected that turn of like that interpretation of the Joker and Batman and how dark and how that story went, but it was friggin' awesome,
right?
Because the story had some integrity to it. The material wasn't treated like a joke, that's also the other downfall of Last Jedi, where it's like all kind of like almost making fun of what you as a fan are going into and have so much you revere, you know. And I know he was just trying to dismantle it to create something new, but you can do that, but you have to deliver the story. Right. Empire, after you sat back and it sank in, it's like, well, it wasn't what you expected, but hell, yeah, I mean, if you were not intrigued for that next chapter and where that was going. Same thing with Dark Knight. You can argue whether that was followed up with well enough or not. But I mean, look what you got. And it was a little bit subversive in terms of what you're going and expecting, but it was so brilliantly done, you know?
Do you know my favorite movie of the Batman trilogy is the last movie?
Okay, see, that's interesting. Yeah.
And I don't know anyone who feels that. I've never spoken to someone that says that, like, what's it called? What's it called? Is it Rise of the Dark Knight? Dark Knight Rises. It's all
Dark Knight Rises, yeah.
Rise. They're recycling names. Dark Knight Rises to me is my favorite of that trilogy. I think it really wraps everything together. I think it's so dark. I personally love Batman getting his ass handed to him, and then having to like. I think that character is so full of shit because, like, the only thing I like about Justice League the movie. Is when Batman Flash asks him, like, what's your superpower? And Batman's like, I'm rich. Like, I think that's about right. And I think he loses everything in that movie, and then he has to rise from within. I love that story.
That was great. Movie. That was great stuff. The thing that didn't work for me for that was the twist ending or whatever it was. I thought that was kind of like a little cheap. You know, you're gonna build up with another villain. It's like you're supposed to shoehorn the other. So, you know, there were things that I liked, but also for me, it was never going to be able to follow Dark Knight to that degree. But I didn't mind it. I know other people obviously disagree. So,
you know, as you're talking about Dark Knight, like we're getting off. I don't think it's a tangent. Actually, I hate when people are like, "This is a tangent." It's not a tangent. Imagine if a Star Wars movie came out that year. So you have Dark Knight, Iron Man came out in 2008. I know your favorite superhero movie of all time, Hulk. Or is that the Incredible Hulk? The Incredible Hulk that came out. The Marvel Hulk came out that year.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that era where everything was so exciting and like you had these like new takes on things, that to me would have like post 2008. I think that would have been a really cool era to bring in someone to do something cool with Star Wars. But because we went past that and we were into, you know, the Thor 75 and although I get we can't say 75 because like there's Superman 78 and there's Batman 89 now, so you have the multiverses and things. But you know you had all the sequels by that point to the superhero movies that worked. You had 20 X-Men by that point. It felt already flat by 2015. The reboots were already a thing. The Karate Kid, you had like the new Karate Kid. You had everything just felt like rehashed at that point, and so. To do that for Force Awakens, I was like, well, this is great because they're owning it. They're like, it's basically a reboot, right?
Soft reboot, yeah.
Soft reboot. They're doing what they... But then to introduce new things, it sounded cool, but it just wasn't, you know? And so I'm like... Because it was already oversaturated. There was already too much going on in all the other movies. And it's not unique. Guardians of the Galaxy was a better Star Wars movie.
Yeah. I mean, I think... The with Last Jedi, what it should have done, and I'm not to keep harping on that, but it's to your point.
It's where it goes off.
The Force Awakens, you do the soft reboot just to get everyone warm and fuzzy about caring about the universe again. Second film, you do the departure, but really the departure should have been, I think, a more compelling story would have been Rey training as a Jedi with Luke, Snoke continuing to train Kylo, so that you see the two sides of how a Sith is trained and a Jedi is trained. And then at some point, you know, you have those factors meet. And I thought a good cliffhanger ending would have been that part where, you know, he kind of gives her the hand. You know, there should have been a point where the cliffhanger should have been that she took the hand, but you didn't know like who turned in that story, and that could have been an
Yeah.
intriguing thing for the next one. I remember telling some people that idea, and they were like, "Yeah, it could have worked." But that's what the second film should have been, building up those two central characters and their whole, you know, like just building up I think the training of the Sith and the Jedi would have just been a phenomenal film, and then lead that into the finale.
Because we've never seen a Sith train.
Yeah.
Like they always just show up. Right. I agree with you 100%. And yeah, that's yeah. I mean, that was yeah. Like so, this was a really good perspective. I feel really good about this. I'm like, this is a good perspective on both, and I think you have examples of moving away from the OT and in the same token staying true to the OT, and it's like there's just no winning either way. So I think like the realization is just maybe it's just like we do live in a world where there's so many different properties, there's so much multi-platforming. Star Wars set the tone for multi-platforming, where you have the movies, you have the books, you have the toys, you could interact with it however you want, and I think that gave us each one of us an entitled feeling to say this is Star Wars, this is
Right.
my Luke, this is where, and then inevitably, I think we are now in a place where because there's so every property is so easily accessible, I think we can pick and choose. So on my end, on the DC front, as a DC fan, I'm in heaven because I have a Superman show that I love. There's a new Superman show on the CW, and he's a dad. I don't love how he looks. Like he doesn't like again. I would actually think like I would have been happy with if they cast someone. I wouldn't mind if it was like an African American actor or Asian actor or something. Like I think that adds a complexity that is probably truer to the character nowadays. But regardless, I love the show, and I don't have to. And I'm gonna watch next week the Zack Snyder release of Justice League. But I don't have to. Not gonna be that crazy about it because I have a Superman I like. So I think every one of us, we have options now to find that thing that you like and just go with that. And we can just go, oh, what's another Star Wars movie? Whereas I think in the prequels, we didn't have that luxury. It was so new, and we hadn't had a Star Wars movie for like 16 years. So it's all you had. So you had to eat it up, and then it was a huge letdown, huge disappointment. So anyway, that's kind of how I'm What's your summary of the situation?
Well, I think I think it was an interesting take. Definitely getting your perspective on it. I think I think we tried to be as balanced and fair as possible. But obviously we showed our hand, as far as where it goes. But I think as opposed to the original trilogy, these prequels and sequel projects as a whole, they're complex because they each have. I think each of the films you could point out to stuff that works or that's cool. Even with Last Jedi, there might be some visual elements or things that were kind of cool. So they all have strengths, but as a whole, they don't cohere like the original trilogy did. They have weaknesses for different reasons, different agendas. So it's an interesting thing to study as a phenomenon as a whole, and unfortunately the whole saga doesn't hang together. It was sad to see it go out on that kind of weak note, where it just kind of felt like, oh man, after all these years, you don't get that Avengers Endgame payoff, that it was so worthy of. Maybe they'll redeem it with some of the TV and stuff. But yeah, it's a mixed bag. So I think it's multi-generational. So maybe the one you grew up with, you're gonna like it. I mean, I've spoken to people who love the prequels because that's their trilogy, and they find the original trilogy boring. Believe it or not. There's probably going to be those that grow up with the sequel trilogy. I think the character of Rey is important for, young girls who are coming up, and to make it accessible, more female friendly, that kind of thing too. So again, it all has pluses and pluses and weaknesses to it. Pluses and minuses. But I will say, for all the shit that George has been, subject to over the years, we just got to give him a nod out and say, we love you, George. And, I mean, we kind of owe so much of our childhoods to you. So I can only be grateful for at least that original trilogy that he built out. Whatever they did with it subsequently, that's for other generations to discover. But at least I had that. And I know like you can speak to how much it meant to your childhood growing up, so I'll always be thankful for George's fertile imagination and just that his brilliance and all the characters that he came up with, originally. I mean, they're all so memorable. And
a huge part of that, 100%, a huge part of that is the toys too. Like, I don't think those movies wouldn't have stayed with me as long. Like, there were other movies around that time, but the fact that I could go home and play with the Kenner toys,
Yeah.
like that expanded on my addiction to that world and to that property, you know. So to your point, I agree with you 100%. Thank you, George, for yeah, for making my childhood have this kind of like this thread, that this connective fabric that I could always go express myself creatively from watching the movies to then being able to like do my own Star Wars stories at home with the characters, you know.
Yeah, the magic, it was magic. It was imagination. It was opening up your imagination as a kid, and just, making, our mundane worlds that we're stuck in. And it gave you this alternate universe that was just so much more inviting. And, it was the world that you wanted to be in as opposed to the world you were stuck in as a kid.
And especially when like seeing like Princess Leia and that slave girl off. I'm just kidding. It's terrible.
I was like at the perfect age for that. Like the way I progressed in those movies was like I was just the perfect age for each of those story beats to happen, and definitely for Slave Leia.
I have such a hard time showing that scene to my daughter. Like I'm just like, oh, I don't even like that's we talk about cringeworthy. Like I do have to say offset, and I probably we're gonna end it. This is a 2-hour episode, but that slave girl thing is again like signs of what's to come in the prequels.
Yeah, but you know what? I don't
So
care. That's another thing I'm going to say. Thank you, George. Thank you, George, for that, and forever cementing the our beloved Carrie Fisher in our memory.
There's
she was a strong character, but she was hot too, and I don't mind saying that. She was just
there's a
iconic.
funny there's an interview with her where she's like, man, if I bent over, you could see all the way to Florida.
That's a great Carrie thing to say too.
Yeah, I love that saying. So, like, yeah. At any rate, all right. Thank you so much for watching another episode of the R&B show. Definitely do all the things, subscribe, all the things, and we'll keep churning them out. Keep entertaining you with our long debates.
Yeah, we'll have to set up a form for feedback. So future ideas, topics that they want us to cover, we'll open it up for that too.
And when we say feedback, I just mean like how much you love this show. I don't.
Yeah, positive feedback. Keep your negative comments to yourself. You're trolling.
100%. All right, y'all have a good day. Thank you so much.
Bye.